V.I. Lenin, A Letter to the German Communists, 14th of August, 1921. Dear comrades, I had intended to state my view of the lessons of the Third Congress of the Communist International in a detailed article. Unfortunately, I have not been able to start on this work because of ill health. The fact that a congress of your party, the United Communist Party of Germany, VKPD, has been called for August 22nd compels me to hasten with this letter, which I have to finish within a few hours if I'm not to be late in sending it to Germany. Footnote: Vereinigte Kommunistische Partei Deutschlands, VKPD, United Communist Party of Germany, was formed at the Unity Congress of the German Communist Party and the left wing of the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany. It was held in Berlin from December 4th to 7th, 1920. In October 1920, the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany split at the Congress in Halle when the majority demanded immediate affiliation to the Third International and complete adoption of the 21 conditions of affiliation worked out by the Second Congress of the Comintern. The right wing of the party walked out of the Halle Congress and, under the old name, formed a separate party, which later, in September 1922, joined the Social Democratic Party. Lenin sent his letter to the Second Congress of the German Communist Party, which was held in Jena from August 22nd to 26th, 1921. The items on the agenda were the Third Congress of the Comintern, the party's immediate tasks, trade union activity, the famine in Soviet Russia and ways of helping her, etc. One of the chairmen was Wilhelm Pieck. A resolution adopted by an overwhelming majority approved the decisions of the Third Congress of the Comintern and acknowledged the correctness of the criticism in the thesis of the Third Congress of the party's mistakes during the March 1921 uprising. The party resumed its old name of the Communist Party of Germany. End of footnote. So far as I can judge, the position of the Communist Party in Germany is a particularly difficult one. This is understandable. Firstly and mainly, from the end of 1918, the international position of Germany very quickly and sharply aggravated her internal revolutionary crisis and impelled the vanguard of the proletariat towards an immediate seizure of power. At the same time, the German and the entire international bourgeoisie, excellently armed and organized, and taught by the quote-unquote Russian experience, hurled itself upon the revolutionary proletariat of Germany in a frenzy of hate. Tens of thousands of the best people of Germany, her revolutionary workers, were killed or tortured to death by the bourgeoisie, its heroes, Noske and company, its servants, the Scheidemans, etc., and by its indirect and quote-unquote subtle, and therefore particularly valuable accomplices, the knights of the so-called 2.5 International, with their despicable spinelessness, vacillations, pedantry, and philistinism. The armed capitalists set traps for the unarmed workers. They killed them wholesale, murdered their leaders, ambushing them one by one, and making excellent use to this end of the counter-revolutionary howling of both shades of social democrats, the Scheidemanites and the Kautskyites. When the crisis broke out, however, the German workers lacked a genuine revolutionary party, owing to the fact that the split was brought about too late, and owing to the burden of the accursed tradition of so-called unity with capitalism's corrupt, in parentheses the Scheidemans, Legiens, Davids and company, and spineless, in parentheses the Kautskys, Hilferdings and company, gang of lackeys. The heart of every honest and class-conscious worker who accepted the Ball Manifesto of 1912 at its face value and not as a quote-unquote gesture on the part of the scoundrels of the second and 2.5 grades, was filled with incredibly bitter hatred for the opportunism of the old German Social Democrats, and this hatred, the greatest and most noble sentiment of the best people among the oppressed and exploited masses, blinded people and prevented them from keeping their heads and working out a correct strategy with which to reply to the excellent strategy of the Entente capitalists, who were armed, organized, and schooled by the quote-unquote Russian experience and supported by France, Britain, and America. This hatred pushed them into premature insurrections. Footnote: The Ball Manifesto of 1912 on war was adopted by the Extraordinary International Socialist Congress in Ball, held on November 24th to 25th, 1912. It warned the peoples of the danger of a worldwide imperialist war, exposed its predatory aims, and called on the workers to fight for peace, confronting, quote, capitalist imperialism with the international solidarity of the proletariat, unquote. The manifesto included Lenin's clause, taken from the Stuttgart Congress Resolution 1907, that in the event of the outbreak of an imperialist war, the socialists should utilize the economic and political crisis caused by the war to hasten the downfall of capitalist class rule and fight for a socialist revolution. End of footnote. That is why the development of the revolutionary working class movement in Germany has since the end of 1918 been treading a particularly hard and painful road. But it has marched and is marching steadily forward. There is the incontrovertible fact of the gradual swing to the left among the masses of workers, the real majority of the laboring and exploited people in Germany, both those organized in the old Menshevik trade unions, that is, the unions serving the bourgeoisie, and those entirely or almost entirely unorganized. What the German proletariat must and will do, and this is the guarantee of victory, is keep their heads, systematically rectify the mistakes of the past, steadily win over the masses of the workers, both inside and outside the trade unions, patiently build up a strong and intelligent Communist Party capable of giving real leadership to the masses at every turn of events, and work out a strategy that is on a level with the best international strategy of the most advanced bourgeoisie, which is quote-unquote enlightened by age-long experience in general, and the Russian experience in particular. On the other hand, the difficult position of the Communist Party of Germany is aggravated at present moment by the breakaway of the not very good communists on the left, the Communist Workers' Party of Germany, KAPD, and on the right, Paul Levy and his little magazine, Unser Weg, or Soviet. Footnote. Soviet, a monthly published in Berlin from 1919 to July 1921. It was edited by Paul Levy, and among its contributors were Henrietta Roland Holst, Paul Fröhlich, Adolf Maslov, Fritz Geyer, and others. From July 1st, 1921, when Paul Levy was expelled from the United Communist Party of Germany, the magazine changed its political complexion and adopted the name of Unser Weg, Our Way. It was closed down at the end of 1922. End of footnote. Beginning with the Second Congress of the Communist International, the so-called leftists or Kapists have received sufficient warning from us in the international arena. Until sufficiently strong, experienced, and influential communist parties have been built, at least in the principal countries, the participation of semi-anarchist elements in our international congresses has to be tolerated and is to some extent even useful. It is useful insofar as these elements serve as a clear warning to inexperienced communists, and also insofar as they themselves are still capable of learning. All over the world, anarchism has been split up, not since yesterday, but since the beginning of the imperialist war of 1914 to 18, into two trends, one pro-Soviet and the other anti-Soviet, one in favor of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the other against it. We must allow this process of disintegration among the anarchists to go on and come to a head. Hardly anyone in Western Europe has experienced anything like a big revolution. There the experience of great revolutions has been almost entirely forgotten, and the transition from the desire to be revolutionary and from talk and resolutions about revolution to real revolutionary work is very difficult, painful, and slow. It goes without saying, however, that the semi-anarchist elements can and should be tolerated only within certain limits. In Germany, we tolerate them for quite a long time. The Third Congress of the Communist International faced them with an ultimatum and fixed a definite time limit. If they have now voluntarily resigned from the Communist International, all the better. Firstly, they have saved us the trouble of expelling them. Secondly, it has now been demonstrated most conclusively and most graphically, and proved with precise facts to all vacillating workers, and all those who have been inclined towards anarchism because of their hatred for the opportunism of the old Social Democrats, that the Communist International has been patient, that it has not expelled anarchists immediately and unconditionally, and that it has given them an attentive hearing and helped them to learn. We must now pay less attention to the Kapists. By polemizing with them, we merely give them publicity. They are too unintelligent. It is wrong to take them seriously, and it is not worth being angry with them. They have no influence among the masses and will acquire none unless we make mistakes. Let us leave this tiny trend to die a natural death. The workers themselves will realize that it is worthless. Let us propagate and implement with greater effect the organizational and tactical decisions of the Third Congress of the Communist International, instead of giving the Kapists publicity by arguing with them. The infantile disorder of so-called leftism is passing and will pass away as the movement grows. Similarly, we are now needlessly helping Paul Levy. We are needlessly giving him publicity by polemizing with him. That we should argue with him is exactly what he wants. Now, after the decisions of the Third Congress of the Communist International, we must forget about him and devote all our attention, all our efforts to peaceful, practical, and constructive work without any squabbling, polemics, or bringing up the quarrels of yesterday in the spirit of the decisions of the Third Congress. It is my conviction that Comrade K. Radek's article, The Third World Congress and the March Action and Future Tactics in Die Rote Fahne, the central organ of the United Communist Party of Germany, issues of July 14th and 15th, 1921, sins quite considerably against this general and unanimously adopted decision of the Third Congress. Footnote: Die Rote Fahne, the Red Banner, a paper founded by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg as the central organ of the Spartacus League. It later became the central organ of the Communist Party of Germany. It was published in Berlin from November 9th, 1918, but was continuously harassed and repeatedly closed down by the authorities. The paper played an important role in turning the Communist Party into a truly mass proletarian and revolutionary party, free from all kinds of opportunists. It stood for united working-class action against the country's militarization and the spread of Nazism. Ernst Thälmann, Chairman of the CC of the Communist Party of Germany, was an active contributor. After the Nazi dictatorship was set up, the paper was closed down, but continued to appear illegally. From 1935, it was issued in Prague, and from October 1936 to late 1939 in Brussels. End of footnote. This article, a copy of which was sent to me by one of the Polish communists, is quite unnecessarily, and in a way that positively harms our work, directed not only against Paul Levy, that would be very unimportant, but also against Clara Zetkin. And yet Clara Zetkin herself concluded a so-called peace treaty in Moscow during the Third Congress with the CC, the Centrale of the United Communist Party of Germany, providing for joint non-factional work, and we all approved of the treaty. In his misplaced polemical zeal, Comrade K. Radek has gone to the length of saying something positively untrue, attributing to Zetkin the idea of, quote-unquote, putting off, verlegt, quote, every general action by the party, unquote, jede allgemeine Aktion der Partei, quote, until the day when large masses rise, unquote, auf den Tag, wo die große Massen aufstehen werden. It goes without saying that by such methods, Comrade K. Radek is rendering Paul Levy the best service the latter could wish for. There's nothing Paul Levy wants so much as a controversy endlessly dragged out, with as many people involved in it as possible, and efforts to drive Zetkin away from the party by polemical breaches of the peace treaty which she herself concluded and which was approved by the entire Communist International. Comrade K. Radek's article serves as an excellent example of how Paul Levy is assisted from the quote-unquote left. Here I must explain to the German comrades why I defended Paul Levy so long at the Third Congress. Firstly, because I made Levy's acquaintance through Radek in Switzerland in 1915 or 1916. At that time, Levy was already a Bolshevik. I cannot help entertaining a certain amount of distrust towards those who accepted Bolshevism only after its victory in Russia and after it had scored a number of victories in the international arena. But of course this reason is relatively unimportant, for, after all, my personal knowledge of Paul Levy is very small. Incomparably more important was the second reason, namely, that essentially much of Levy's criticism of the March action in Germany in 1921 was correct. Not, of course, when he said that the uprising was a so-called putsch. That assertion of his was absurd. It is true that Levy did all he possibly could, and much besides, to weaken and spoil his criticism and make it difficult for himself and others to understand the essence of the matter by bringing in a mass of details in which he was obviously wrong. Levy couched his criticism in an impermissible and harmful form. While urging others to pursue a cautious and well-considered strategy, Levy himself committed worse blunders than a schoolboy by rushing into battle so prematurely, so unprepared, so absurdly and wildly that he was certain to lose any quote-unquote battle, spoiling or hampering his work for many years, although the battle could and should have been won. Levy behaved like a quote-unquote anarchist intellectual. If I'm not mistaken, the German term is Edelanarchist, instead of behaving like an organized member of the Proletarian Communist International. Levy committed a breach of discipline. By this series of incredibly stupid blunders, Levy made it difficult to concentrate attention on the essence of the matter, and the essence of the matter, that is, the appraisal and correction of the innumerable mistakes made by the United Communist Party of Germany during the March action of 1921, has been and continues to be of enormous importance. In order to explain and correct these mistakes, which some people enshrined as gems of Marxist tactics, it was necessary to have been on the right wing during the Third Congress of the Communist International. Otherwise, the line of the Communist International would have been a wrong one. I defended and had to defend Levy insofar as I saw before me opponents of his who merely shouted about so-called Menshevism and so-called centrism and refused to see the mistakes of the March action and the need to explain and correct them. These people made a caricature of revolutionary Marxism and a pastime of the struggle against so-called centrism. They might have done the greatest harm to the whole cause, for, quote, no one in the world can compromise the revolutionary Marxists if they do not compromise themselves, unquote. I said to these people, granted that Levy has become a Menshevik. As I have scant knowledge of him personally, I will not insist if the point is proved to me. But it has not yet been proved. All that has been proved till now is that he has lost his head. It is childishly stupid to declare a man a Menshevik merely on these grounds. The training of experienced and influential party leaders is a long and difficult job, and without it the dictatorship of the proletariat and its unity of will remain a phrase. In Russia it took us 15 years, 1903 to 17, to produce a group of leaders. 15 years of fighting Menshevism, 15 years of Tsarist persecution, 15 years, which included the years of the First Revolution, 1905, a great and mighty revolution. Yet we have had our sad cases when even fine comrades lost their heads. If the West European comrades imagine that they are insured against such quote-unquote sad cases, it is sheer childishness, and we cannot but combat it. Levy had to be expelled for breach of discipline. Tactics had to be determined on the basis of a most detailed explanation and correction of the mistakes made during the March 1921 action. If after this Levy wants to behave in the old way, he will show that his expulsion was justified, and the wavering or hesitant workers will be given all the more forceful and convincing proof of the absolute correctness of the Third Congress decisions concerning Paul Levy. Having made a cautious approach at the Congress to the appraisal of Levy's mistakes, I can now say with all the more assurance that Levy has hastened to confirm the worst expectations. I have before me number 6 of his magazine, Unser Weg, of July 15, 1921. It is evident from the editorial note printed at the head of the magazine that the decisions of the Third Congress are known to Paul Levy. What is his reply to them? Menshevik catchwords such as a great excommunication, grosser Bahn, canon law, kanonisches Recht, and that he will, quote-unquote, quite freely, in vollständiger Freiheit, quote-unquote, discuss these decisions. What greater freedom can a man have if he has been freed of the title of party member and member of the Communist International? And please note that he expects party members to write for him, for Levy, anonymously. First, he plays a dirty trick on the party, hits it in the back and sabotages its work. Then he discusses the essence of the Congress decisions. That is magnificent, but by doing this, Levy puts paid to himself. Paul Levy wants to continue the fight. It will be a great strategic error to satisfy his desire. I would advise the German comrades to prohibit all controversy with Levy and his magazine in the columns of the daily party press. He must not be given publicity. He must not be allowed to divert the fighting party's attention from important matters to unimportant ones. In cases of extreme necessity, the controversy could be conducted in weekly or monthly magazines or in pamphlets, and as far as possible, care must be taken not to afford the copyists and Paul Levy the pleasure they feel when they are mentioned by name. Reference should simply be made, quote, to certain not very clever critics who at all cost want to regard themselves as communists, unquote. I am informed that at the last meetings of the enlarged CC, Ausschuss, even the left-winger Friesland was compelled to launch a sharp attack on Maslow, who is playing at leftism. and wishes to exercise himself in quote-unquote hunting centrists. The unreasonableness, to put it mildly, of this Maslow's conduct was also revealed over here in Moscow. Really, this Maslow and 2 or 3 of his supporters and confederates, who obviously do not wish to observe the peace treaty and have more zeal than sense, should be sent by the German party to Soviet Russia for a year or 2. We would find useful work for them, we would make men of them, and the international and German movement would certainly gain thereby. The German communists must at all cost, in the internal dissension, get rid of the quarrelsome elements on both sides, forget about Paul Levy and the copyists, and get down to real work. There is plenty to be done. In my opinion, the tactical and organizational resolutions of the Third Congress of the Communist International mark a great step forward. Every effort must be exerted to really put both resolutions into effect. This is a difficult matter, but it can and should be done. First, the communists had to proclaim their principles to the world. That was done at the first Congress. It was the first step. The second was to give the Communist International organizational form and to draw up conditions for affiliation to it. Conditions making for real separation from the centrists, from the direct and indirect agents of the bourgeoisie within the working class movement. That was done at the second Congress. At the third Congress, it was necessary to start practical, constructive work to determine concretely, taking account of the practical experience of the communist struggle already begun, exactly what the line of further activity should be in respect of tactics and of organization. We have taken this third step. We have an army of communists all over the world. It is still poorly trained and poorly organized. It would be extremely harmful to forget this truth or be afraid of admitting it. Submitting ourselves to a most careful and rigorous test, and studying the experience of our movement, we must train this army efficiently, we must organize it properly, and test it in all sorts of maneuvers, all sorts of battles, in attack and in retreat. We cannot win without this long and hard schooling. The crux of the situation in the international communist movement in the summer of 1921 was that some of the best and most influential sections of the Communist International did not quite properly understand this task. They exaggerated the quote-unquote struggle against centrism ever so slightly. They went ever so slightly beyond the borderline at which this struggle turns into a pastime and revolutionary Marxism begins to be compromised. That was the crux of the Third Congress. The exaggeration was a slight one, but the danger arising out of it was enormous. It was difficult to combat it, because the exaggeration was done by really the best and most loyal elements, without whom the formation of the Communist International would, perhaps, have been impossible. In the tactical amendments published in the newspaper Moscow, in German, French, and English, and signed by the German, Austrian, and Italian delegations, this exaggeration was definitely revealed. The more so because these amendments were proposed to a draft resolution that was already final, following long and all-round preparatory work. The rejection of these amendments was a straightening out of the line of the Communist International. It was a victory over the danger of exaggeration. Footnote: Moscow was the organ of the Third Congress of the Communist International, and it was published in Moscow. End of footnote. Exaggeration, if not corrected, was sure to kill the Communist International, for, quote, no one in the world can compromise the revolutionary Marxists if they do not compromise themselves, unquote. No one in the world will be able to prevent the victory of the communists over the second and 2.5 internationals, and under the conditions prevailing in the 20th century Western Europe and America after the imperialist war, this means victory over the bourgeoisie, unless the communists prevent it themselves. Exaggeration, however slight, means preventing victory. Exaggeration of the struggle against centrism means saving centrism, means strengthening its position, its influence over the workers. In the period between the second and the third Congresses, we learned to wage victorious struggle against centrism on an international scale. This is proved by the facts. We will continue to wage this struggle, expulsion of Levy and of Serradi's party to the end. We have, however, not yet learned on an international scale to combat wrong exaggerations in the struggle against centrism, but we have become conscious of this defect, as has been proved by the course and outcome of the Third Congress, and precisely because we have become conscious of our defect, we will rid ourselves of it. And then we shall be invincible, because without support inside the proletariat, through the medium of the bourgeois agents of the Second and 2.5 Internationals, the bourgeoisie in Western Europe and America cannot retain power. More careful, more thorough preparation for fresh and more decisive battles, both defensive and offensive, that is the fundamental and principal thing in the decisions of the Third Congress. Quote, "Communism will become a mass force in Italy if the Italian Communist Party unceasingly and steadily fights the opportunist policy of Seratism and at the same time is able to maintain close contact with the proletarian masses in the trade unions, during strikes, during clashes with the counter-revolutionary fascist organizations, if it is able to merge the movements of all the working class organizations and to transform the spontaneous outbreaks of the working class into carefully prepared battles." Unquote. Quote, "The United Communist Party of Germany will be better able to carry out mass action the better it adapts its fighting slogans to the actual situation in future, the more thoroughly it studies the situation, and the more coordinated and disciplined the action it conducts." Unquote. Such are the most pertinent passages of the tactical resolution of the Third Congress. To win over the majority of the proletariat to our side, such is the principal task, the heading of point 3 of the resolution on tactics. Of course, we do not give the winning of the majority a formal interpretation, as do the Knights of Philistine Democracy of the 2.5 International. When in Rome in July 1921, the entire proletariat, the reformist proletariat of the trade unions and the centrists of Serrati's party, followed the communists against the fascists. That was winning over the majority of the working class to our side. This was far, very far from winning them decisively. It was doing so only partially, only momentarily, only locally, but it was winning over the majority, and that is possible even if, formally, the majority of the proletariat follow bourgeois leaders, or leaders who pursue a bourgeois policy, as do all the leaders of the Second and 2.5 Internationals, or if the majority of the proletariat are wavering. This winning over is gaining ground steadily in every way throughout the world. Let us make more thorough and careful preparations for it. Let us not allow a single serious opportunity to slip by when the bourgeoisie compels the proletariat to undertake a struggle. Let us learn to correctly determine the moment when the masses of the proletariat cannot but rise together with us. Then victory will be assured, no matter how severe some of the defeats and transitions in our great campaign may be. Our tactical and strategic methods, if we take them on an international scale, still lag behind the excellent strategy of the bourgeoisie, which has learned from the example of Russia and will not let itself be, quote-unquote, taken by surprise. But our forces are greater, immeasurably greater. We are learning tactics and strategy. We have advanced this science on the basis of the mistakes of March 1921 action. We shall completely master this science. In the overwhelming majority of countries, our parties are still very far from being what real communist parties should be. They are far from being real vanguards of the genuinely revolutionary and only revolutionary class, with every single member taking part in the struggle, in the movement, in the everyday life of the masses. But we are aware of this defect. We brought it out most strikingly in the Third Congress resolution on the work of the party, and we shall overcome this defect. Comrades, German communists, permit to conclude by expressing the wish that your party congress on August 22nd will with a firm hand put a stop once and for all to the trivial struggle against those who have broken away on the left and on the right. Inner party struggles must stop. Down with everyone who wants to drag them out, directly or indirectly. We know our tasks today much more clearly, concretely, and thoroughly than we did yesterday. We are not afraid of pointing out openly to our mistakes in order to rectify them. We shall now devote all the party's efforts to improving its organization, to enriching the quality and content of its work, to creating closer contact with the masses, and to working out increasingly correct and accurate working class tactics and strategy. With communist greetings, N. Lenin, August 14th, 1921.